At 9:15 in the morning, the Caribbean Sea looked almost too perfect. Calm water stretched in every direction, the sky was clear, and the early haze had already burned away under the rising sun. Visibility was wide open. There were no storms, no crowded shipping lanes nearby, and nothing on the horizon that suggested trouble. For naval planners, it was the kind of morning that feels predictable, controlled, and easy to read. The U.S. Carrier Strike Group was moving steadily through international waters, carrying out routine operations. There was nothing secretive about it. Nothing rushed, nothing that suggested the group was trying to hide its presence. The carrier maintained its speed, the escort ships kept their protective positions, flight deck activity followed a normal rhythm. From the outside, it looked like another ordinary day at sea. Then the radar picture changed. At first, it was only one surface contact appearing at the far edge of the display. It was faint, but it stayed consistent. Moments later, another return appeared. Then a third. The spacing was too clean to be random traffic. The speed profiles did not match fishing boats, commercial vessels, or cargo ships passing through the area. Inside the carrier's operations center, nobody reacted with panic. They reacted with focus. Each contact was marked, tracked, and studied. Bearings were checked again. Speed was confirmed. Movement was plotted against the carrier's projected path. This was not background noise. This was coordinated movement. By 9:18 a.m., the pattern was clear. The contacts were Venezuelan naval vessels moving together from the southwest. They were not drifting. They were not simply watching from a distance. They were closing in. At first, the approach still remained in a gray area, close enough to observe, but far enough to deny any direct provocation. Navies monitor each other all the time. Shadowing a carrier group is not unusual by itself. But what happened next changed the tone of the entire morning. At 9:22 a.m., the lead Venezuelan ship adjusted course. It was not a small correction. It was a deliberate turn that placed the vessel closer to an intercept line with the carrier's projected route. The calculated closest point of approach dropped sharply. That was the moment the bridge was notified. This was no longer simple observation, it was a challenge. The carrier did not turn, it did not slow down, it did not speed up. In moments like this, discipline matters more than drama. Sudden movement creates a story other people can use. Steady movement creates a record. Radio channels were prepared, not to provoke, but to document. Identification procedures were ready. Every detail was logged in real time. Time, bearing, speed, distance, and course. No emotion, just facts. On the flight deck, operations continued. Sailors secured equipment. Crews moved with practiced precision. From a distance, the carrier looked almost indifferent. That was not accidental. Calm is also a signal. Below decks, however, the ship was fully alert. Long-range sensors continued sweeping the horizon. Electronic monitoring teams shifted into passive collection, quietly recording every signal coming from the approaching vessels. There was no interference, no dramatic response, only observation. By 9:28 a.m., the Venezuelan formation had moved closer. The escort ships made subtle adjustments, not in a dramatic way, but enough to tighten the overall defensive shape around the carrier. It was a silent message across the water. We see what is happening, and we are ready. Still, there was no escalation. Then came the radio call. The transmission from the Venezuelan lead vessel was firm, controlled, and political in tone. It questioned the carrier's presence and projected resolve. It was clearly meant to be heard, recorded, and repeated. The carrier's response was brief and professional. Identification, position, statement of lawful operation in international waters, nothing emotional, nothing confrontational, no debate. But the Venezuelan ships did not turn away. They held their course. That decision mattered, because a U.S. aircraft carrier is not just one massive ship moving through the ocean. It is a complete system. Sensors layered over sensors. Escort ships linked with aircraft. Information flowing constantly through a larger network. Getting closer to that system does not automatically create leverage. It creates exposure. Every radar sweep reveals something. Every course change says something. Every transmission adds to the picture. Every minute spent inside that environment gives away information that cannot be taken back. At 9:33 a.m., the distance continued to shrink. Still, the carrier did not change course. The sea remained calm. The formation remained steady. And somewhere between the Venezuelan decision to press closer and the carrier's refusal to react emotionally, the balance of the encounter quietly shifted. They had come looking for a reaction. What they found instead was control. By 9:35 a.m., the encounter had moved beyond coincidence and into calculation. The Venezuelan vessels continued to close. Their formation was loose but clearly intentional. One ship pressed forward while the others held offset positions, as if waiting to see what the carrier group would do next. Inside the carrier's operations center, the picture was unmistakable. Speed, bearing, spacing, and timing all pointed to a controlled maneuver designed to apply pressure without openly crossing a line. At 9:38 a.m., the closest point of approach dropped again. The lead Venezuelan ship adjusted heading by only a few degrees, but the effect was immediate. The intercept geometry tightened. The time window narrowed. The bridge acknowledged the update without comment. Still, no course change was ordered. No increase in speed. The carrier held its line. In naval operations, staying predictable under pressure is not weakness. It is authority. The escorts responded with precision. One destroyer on the carrier's forward quarter eased outward slightly, creating a clearer buffer. Another ship mirrored the movement on the opposite side. The formation was not closing in aggressively, it was shaping space. Quietly, the strike group reminded everyone watching that the carrier did not travel alone. Above, aircraft remained ready. Below the surface, unseen assets maintained their positions. Around the carrier, every layer of the group was connected, patient, and prepared. At 9:42 a.m., Venezuelan radio traffic increased. Short transmissions, controlled bursts. Nothing chaotic. Their purpose was not confusion. It was signaling. Each call seemed designed to assert presence, to create the impression that the distance had been closed on their terms. But proximity works both ways. Inside the carrier's electronic monitoring spaces, technicians continued to collect passively. Every frequency shift, every modulation change, every transmission pattern was logged and stored. No interference, no visible answer. Just quiet absorption. This is the part many challengers underestimate. The closer you come, the more you reveal. At 9:45 a.m., the Venezuelan lead vessel transmitted again, this time with a stronger tone. The message carried political weight rather than operational urgency. It framed the encounter as a question of sovereignty and resolve, not simply navigation and safety. The carrier's reply stayed exactly the same: calm, procedural, legal, and controlled. That consistency was deliberate. On the flight deck, alert crews were now fully prepared. Aircraft sat ready, but motionless. There was no rush to launch. Acting too early would change the tone of the encounter. Waiting preserved control. By 9:48 a.m., the distance between the two forces had closed enough for visual confirmation. Through optics, sailors could see movement on the opposing decks. Personnel were visible. The posture was not relaxed, but it was also not openly escalatory. This was no accident. The escort ships logged the visuals. Everything was time-stamped, geo-referenced, and recorded. In modern naval encounters, documentation can matter as much as deterrence. Evidence shapes the story afterward. At 9:51 a.m., the situation reached a quiet turning point. The Venezuelan formation hesitated. It did not stop. It did not immediately withdraw, but it slowed slightly just enough to be noticed. It looked like they were waiting for something. A turn from the carrier, a speed change, a visible display, anything that could be presented later as a reaction. It never came. The carrier strike group remained steady, course unchanged, speed constant, formation intact. That restraint carried weight. Because the longer the standoff continued without escalation, the clearer the imbalance became. One side was searching for acknowledgement. The other was collecting advantage. By 9:55 a.m., the Venezuelan ships had gained nothing tactically. No concession, no deviation, no visible reaction they could claim as leverage. With every passing minute, the cost of staying close increased. They were no longer testing resolve. They were exposing themselves to it. The challenge had been issued. The answer had been given, not through force, but through discipline. And that discipline was about to move the encounter in a direction the Venezuelan commanders no longer controlled. By 10:02 a.m., the carrier strike group had entered a different phase of awareness. Not escalation, not drama, dominance through clarity. From the outside, almost nothing had changed. The carrier still held course. Speed remained steady. There were no sudden movements. To someone watching from far away, the scene might have looked uneventful, but inside the strike group, the entire system was now synchronized. At 10:04 a.m., the carrier authorized limited airborne activity. This was not done to intimidate. It was done to observe. A single aircraft was brought into readiness on the flight deck. Its movement was visible, deliberate, and impossible to miss. The message was subtle but clear. Options existed. The Venezuelan vessels noticed. Through long-range optics and radar returns, the change was obvious. Flight deck movement on a U.S. carrier is never casual. Every motion follows procedure, and professional observers know how to read it. The atmosphere shifted, not because anyone raised the stakes, but because intent had become unmistakable. Inside the carrier's operations center, the picture was now complete. Surface tracks were stable, airspace was clear, subsurface awareness was maintained. The strike group held a full understanding of the environment across every domain. That is the quiet power of a carrier. Not only what it can show, but what it can know. At 10:08 a.m., passive collection continued while Venezuelan transmissions persisted. Their signals remained steady, but the tone had changed. Earlier messages had been assertive. Now they were more measured, less posturing, more coordination. That change mattered. It suggested the Venezuelan commanders were reassessing. The escorts tightened their geometry slightly, not by closing distance, but by refining their angles. The formation became more exact, more intentional. There is a difference between simply being nearby and actually controlling space. Then, above the formation, a patrol aircraft lifted smoothly into the clear Caribbean sky. No sharp movement, no aggressive angle, just altitude, visibility, and observation. From that vantage point, the entire encounter could be watched, recorded, and preserved. The Venezuelan ships did not respond by pressing faster. They responded with caution. By 10:12 a.m., their formation began to stretch. Small spacing changes appeared. Minor course adjustments followed. These were not dramatic signs of withdrawal, but they were no longer signs of advance either. Momentum had stalled. This is often where confrontations turn, not in some loud cinematic moment, but in the quiet realization that pushing further carries more risk than reward. On the carrier's bridge, nobody celebrated. Nobody commented. The lack of reaction was part of the strategy. Calm denies drama. Calm denies narrative. At 10:15 a.m., the Venezuelan lead vessel reduced speed slightly. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone without experience at sea. But in naval operations, small changes speak loudly. They were creating space without openly admitting they needed it. The aircraft overhead maintained its orbit. The escorts held position. The carrier remained unchanged. Every movement by the Venezuelan ships had now become reactive, and that was the costly realization. They had approached with the belief that proximity could force engagement, that pressing close to one of America's most capable carrier groups might create leverage or political value. Instead, they had entered a controlled environment where every second favored the side that did not need to prove anything. At 10:18 a.m., Venezuelan radio traffic briefly increased, then faded. Coordination was happening away from the open channel. Decisions were being made. The carrier did not answer. It did not need to. By now, the encounter had stopped being about challenge and started being about exposure. The longer the Venezuelan ships remained inside that envelope, the more information they surrendered. Command behavior, formation habits, communication patterns, response timelines. They were no longer simply testing the carrier. They were being studied by it. At 10:22 a.m., the Venezuelan formation altered course by a few degrees, just enough to widen the gap. It was not a dramatic turn. It was not framed as a retreat, but it was a recognition. The giant was awake, and it had not needed to raise its voice to prove it. The encounter was moving toward its conclusion, not through confrontation, but through realization. By 10:27 a.m., the window for plausible deniability had closed. The Venezuelan vessels were still present, still visible, but no longer advancing. They lingered at a distance that offered little advantage and increasing risk. This was the moment when experienced commanders usually pull away cleanly. End the encounter on their own terms. Preserve the story. Avoid giving away more than necessary. They did not. Instead, the formation hesitated. That hesitation was the mistake. At sea, proximity without purpose becomes exposure. Every extra minute inside another force's operational envelope becomes an information exchange you cannot fully control. By staying close without escalating and without disengaging, the Venezuelan ships surrendered the initiative entirely. Inside the carrier strike group, the shift was immediate but silent. At 10:29 a.m., the task force moved into deeper integrated collection. Nothing loud. Nothing visible. Just a more complete fusion of surface sensors, airborne platforms, and electronic monitoring. The Venezuelan ships were no longer merely being tracked. They were being understood. Every radar sweep was categorized. Every radio pattern was fingerprinted. Course corrections were analyzed not only for direction, but for command behavior. Who was leading? Who was following? How quickly did decisions move through the formation? How did the group respond when pressure turned back on them? This is where modern encounters are often decided without a dramatic moment. At 10:33 a.m., an airborne platform adjusted altitude slightly, improving sensor coverage over the Venezuelan formation. Cameras recorded, heat signatures were captured, communication patterns filled in the gaps. From a distance, it looked like nothing had changed. From inside the system, everything had. The Venezuelan commanders now faced a difficult choice of their own making. If they pushed further, they risked crossing a line they could not afford to cross. If they pulled away too sharply, they appeared to concede the encounter. And if they stayed where they were, they continued providing information to a force built to turn patience into advantage. They chose to stay a little longer. By 10:36 a.m., small inconsistencies began appearing in their formation, slight delays between movements. Minor speed mismatches, subtle signs of uncertainty. These were not major operational failures, but they were tells. And they were recorded. The carrier did not maneuver. It did not signal victory. It simply continued on its original course, steady and unbothered. That steadiness amplified the imbalance, because this encounter had never truly been about who could get closer. It was about who could afford to wait. At 10:40 a.m., Venezuelan radio traffic dropped sharply. Outward signaling faded. Internal coordination seemed to take over. Decisions were being debated behind closed circuits, and once again, time favored only one side. At 10:43 a.m., the lead Venezuelan vessel altered course again, widening the distance without openly declaring a withdrawal. Speed dropped incrementally. The rest of the formation followed. It was quiet, controlled, unannounced, but the meaning was clear. The costly mistake was not the approach itself. Navies test posture. They observe. They measure reactions. That is expected. The mistake was staying too long inside a space where the outcome was never in their favor. They had revealed how they coordinated under pressure, how they communicated when uncertain, how quickly they adapted when quiet dominance was asserted. Those lessons do not expire. By 10:47 a.m., the Venezuelan ships were clearly disengaging, not turning away sharply, but easing out of the encounter as if it had simply run its course. The carrier strike group did not pursue. It did not need to. The encounter had already delivered what mattered. The challenge had failed. The data had been gathered. The message had been sent without a dramatic display. From the Venezuelan perspective, it might have looked like nothing major had happened. From a strategic perspective, everything had. They had challenged America's most powerful carrier group and paid for it not through visible damage, but through exposure. The sea remained calm as the distance widened, but the cost of that morning would follow long after the radar contacts faded. By 10:55 a.m., the encounter was effectively over. The Venezuelan vessels continued to widen the gap, their formation loosening as they moved back toward open water. There were no final radio calls, no declarations, no attempt to loudly frame the outcome. Silence settled over the scene, heavy but unmistakable. The carrier strike group maintained course. There was no chase, no display of triumph. The escort ships returned to their standard positions. Airborne assets transitioned back into routine patterns. To an outside observer, it might have seemed as if nothing of consequence had occurred. That illusion is one of the final layers of modern naval power, because the most important outcomes were never meant to be seen. Inside the carrier's command spaces, the work continued. Sensor logs were finalized, recordings were cross-checked, electronic signatures were cataloged and passed through secure channels to analysts far beyond the horizon. What had been collected that morning was not dramatic footage or headline-making imagery. It was something more valuable. Patterns. The way the Venezuelan ships approached, the moment their confidence seemed strongest, the point where hesitation appeared, the sequence of adjustments after it became clear the carrier would not react emotionally. Those details shaped future encounters. This was never about punishing a challenge. It was about removing uncertainty. Every Navy studies the forces it may one day face. Every commander prepares for situations that may never happen. But nothing replaces real interaction under real pressure. And in that sense, the Venezuelan decision to press closer gave the U.S. Navy something useful. A look at their playbook without forcing a larger response. The broader lesson reaches far beyond the Caribbean. An aircraft carrier is not merely a symbol to be tested by getting close to it. It is a mobile command structure designed to control space, timing, and information at the same time. Challenging it on its own terms, calm seas, clear skies, international waters, does not create leverage. It creates imbalance. For Venezuela, the encounter produced no clear political victory, no concession, no dramatic footage to rally support, no visible change in the carrier's route or behavior. What it produced instead was greater scrutiny, a sharper understanding of their procedures, and a clearer baseline for future U.S. operations in the region. For the carrier strike group, the morning reinforced a principle every sailor learns early. Restraint is not the absence of power. It is the discipline to use power only when it creates advantage. No dramatic warning was needed, no aggressive display was required, no public statement had to follow. That silence was intentional, because when nothing appears to happen, the side that expected a reaction is left to explain the gap between expectation and reality on its own. And that gap can be uncomfortable. As the Caribbean returned to its normal rhythm, the strike group continued its transit unchanged and unchallenged. The Venezuelan ships faded from radar, their intentions still open to interpretation, and their objectives unmet. But the lesson remained. You do not challenge a carrier just to see how it reacts. You challenge it to discover how much you reveal before you realize the mistake. So the question is this: Was this a calculated show of defiance meant for domestic politics and regional messaging? Or was it a strategic miscalculation that gave away far more than it gained? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real-world encounters where power is measured not by noise, but by control, awareness, and discipline, stay with the channel. Because in modern naval operations, the quietest victories often speak the loudest.